Howdy, everybody. Welcome to our podcast. Today, we are having a conversation with Jessica from NAR. Jessica, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here with you. We were just chatting, and I mean, there's so much to talk about when we talk about the housing market today. So excited to be here.
We appreciate it. Now, for those who aren't already familiar with the work product that you provide, you are both an economist and a researcher with NAR, but your official title is...
I'm the Deputy Chief Economist and Vice President of Research at the National Association of REALTORS. So that's a mouthful.
It is. Thank you for helping me with that. And you've been at NAR for how long now?
Forever. I basically started elementary school here. No, I've been here since 2007. So I've seen a lot of history in the housing market here.
That's fantastic because 2007, you started right after the infamous 2008, which was before me, started in 2012. But one of the things we do want to dive into is in general, like these comparisons that keep coming out. And we really, what we want to do though is talk about the idea that we all see these news articles about housing market this, affordability that, and and we really just wanted some help to kind of clear out the noise and get the expert opinion. So just starting off, I'm sure you're constantly getting invited to events and everyone always asks you the exact same question. So, what are your thoughts on the housing market? How do you answer that? Like, is it always the same answer?
No, it very much depends on where I am, right? So, looking at Ural's data, what I can see here is that home sales volume is down year over year, but home prices are up. And actually, home prices are up stronger in your area than what we see as a nationwide whole. It's actually really an interesting market. That speaks to me about a couple things that are probably going on. Affordability really being tough for folks who are trying to enter into the market for potential first-time home buyers. So perhaps they're being pushed to the sidelines because they can't afford to purchase a home. That's something that's pretty universal in many markets around the country. But if you have home price growth that's stronger than what we see overall, you're going to have a lot of folks who are renting for a longer period of time, doubling up with family because they can't afford to get into the housing market. And that's going to push down sales overall. And so that's I think where we look at really interesting markets and interesting dynamics. But we're in a changing point too, where we've come out of that really strong pandemic activity. A lot of people locked down low interest rates. A lot of people even paid off their mortgage because they were able to do that. And so they're now sitting in a house where they have a pretty good monthly payment and really no incentive to move. And so that's pushing down home sales activity too, while home prices go up because we know that there's a limited supply overall, though I know construction went up a little bit in your market too.
So when we talk about home prices going up, is it always just the matter of that more buyers want supply and there isn't enough supply? Is that always the only thing that kind of puts it in there?
Well, there's always that. In recent years, that really is what it comes down
That's the
to.
driver of it all.
Yeah, is the supply and demand really marketplace? And so when we look at that, there's a lot of factors that go into that. Some of it is the lack of building that happened overall. So I know that Texas overall is unique in that you had more building and you've had more building than we see in a lot of areas of the country. If we think about the Northeast, there's not a lot of places to move. Like take Long Island, where are you gonna build there? You're not gonna build like barges that you can put homes on, right? So if we think about Texas, you all have space where you can move. Texas, it's always bigger, right? So,
Yeah.
um,
Thank you for recognizing that. We appreciate it.
yeah, no, I got you. Yeah, I've heard that once or twice. So, we know that there is that space to build in Texas, and so that was allowing new inventory to come into the market. That being said, that inventory is not always affordable for someone who is trying to break into the market, for a retiree who wants to really right size their house. They may be looking at a very large new property. That's not going to work for them. So we have to think about which new inventory we're really bringing into a market. And when we think about that underbuilding that happened, even though there's been blips that have gone up in the building activity, we're still thinking about underbuilding for more than a decade in the housing market. So as we look at that, there's a long way to go to actually bring enough inventory in to meet the demand of the population. And what's unique about Texas too is that you all have a really young population. And so when we think about people finding their first home, thinking about the opportunity to break into the market, we're not talking about a place like Maine, I will pick on them, where they have a much older population. They're trying to attract young people into their state, trying to have incentives to bring young people in. Y'all have a young population. So these young adults are trying to find that place to live.
And is it unusual to, I mean, I feel like somebody else would just say y'all are the victims of urban sprawl because we don't build anything downtown. We just keep going further and further out. But then that puts more of a strain on infrastructure and all those things. So everyone's like, no, that's the while it may make things better for you in Texas, but you're actually going to create a bigger problem down the road. Is there a different lens to look at it when we talk about how Texas is very much like we absolutely like to go further out is fine because we want our yards and we're very much dependent on our cars as opposed to mass transportation. Not a jab at anybody and from Texas who's listening, but is it problematic though to keep going that far out?
Well, I can't place a judgment on that, right? What I
Right.
can say is what I can see from home buyers, and what they're doing is that with that urban sprawl, moving into small towns, moving out to outer suburbs, it tends to be more affordable. And so that brings in new people into the housing market because suddenly you can afford a place, but you may have a much longer commute. Now, my husband works in public transportation, so I'm not going to dog public transportation, but I know that that is a pathway that some people take, but the accessibility of that too can be really limited in a lot of communities. So when you think about that infrastructure, that maybe that means more time on the road, maybe that means filling up your gas tank more, and that's going to be costly. That's something that you have to add into one's budget. It's the totality of what you're giving out per month, and you have to include those commuting costs. The fact that you have to have a car, that you'll have to do maintenance on your car, all of those kinds of things are probably going to cost more than public transportation for a typical homeowner.
Because the house may be cheaper out there, but you're going to have to pay more for all the other things that come along with it. Got
Right. And that's when we think about the totality of a housing expense too.
it.
Insurance is a big headline today, thinking about
Yes.
insurance costs going up, but also thinking about energy costs for that home too. So if you have a super energy efficient home, where I know air conditioning is going to be quite important in your area, we know that if you have something that's more energy efficient, you're paying less for that. What we tend to find though is for that new first time home buyer, they're going to buy an older home because that's what they can afford. That's what they can find, and then their energy costs may be more expensive too. So just thinking about all of those all-encompassing expenses.
So I'm going to come back to that first response, and you mentioned it's a changing market, and maybe I'm doing it an injustice because I keep saying we're just going back to the way it was in 2019, y'all, or we're going back to. Is it? Do we call it a changing market? Do we call it we're leveling out? This is the new normal? I mean, or we're just changing from that crazy run that was 2020 COVID era.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of fairness in all of those statements, honestly. Like I love a good cliche. So
Me too. Yeah.
I mean, you could say that there's a wet blanket on the housing market, right? So like you could certainly say that. You could say it's stuck in second gear. All of these things are probably true. But I do think that there's a level set that's honestly going on. I think you said it right, that we're coming back. We have a little whiplash from that intensity of the market. We should not expect home prices to go up by 20% year over year. That's not a healthy market. And that's what was happening when the interest rates were so low during that 2020, 2021 period. So we're coming down to a more normal market. Seeing in your market that this last month in July's data for San Antonio that you had a 4% year over year home price growth for single family homes, that's actually really in line with the norm. The norm is 3 to 5% on an annual basis. So you're right there in what is normal.
And we pride ourselves on always saying San Antonio does a great job of trying to stay in the middle and avoid the peaks and valleys. Now, one of the things that I feel like most people are constantly wanting though is that 2.6% interest mortgage rate, right? Or mortgage interest rate. And people are, well, you know what? I'm gonna wait for the prices on the house to come down, which I think what we're essentially saying, and I don't know if people know, like, but when you say that, you're essentially saying, hi, I'd like 2020 to come back all over again so that that this, like, those are once in a lifetime experiences that were happened as a result of something bad. So us going back to 2.6 is not, that means something else is going on in the world, right?
Oh, yeah, no, like you should be really concerned about what's going on outside your house if interest rates go down that low.
Right. Yeah. And I think, but everyone's like, I'm going to wait. I'm going to wait. Like it's not.
There would be a very big concern about what's going on. And whether that's another pandemic or whether aliens attack, like that would be like when we're in line for that. So, I mean, if we look at the forecast realistically, and let's talk about rates. So, if we look since January, rates have actually been in the mid six range. They have come down from seven, but they've been actually so flat and so boring. If we look at rates, really little movement. We've had minor movement in the last
Isn't that
couple.
predictability though? Right.
Yes, no, I think it's great.
Okay.
Like,
Okay.
yeah, no, I think it's good. Like, if you're a home buyer and you're going to search for a home, you don't feel this pressure that I have to lock in today. I have to lock in today because rates are going to go up or they're going to go down. You can go and shop for a home that you're looking online and know that you can actually afford that home. Like, this is a good thing for a home buyer to know that. As we look at rates, our forecast for this year is that they may come down a little bit, but we're really staying in the mid 6% range. And that's really where they are. For next year, they may come down into the sixes. If the Fed starts cutting rates, it's not a one-to-one, the Fed funds rate to mortgage interest rates, but there is a domino effect that happens into the mortgage market. And we could see mortgage rates drop into the lower 6% range, but we're still talking about sixes. So we're not talking about sevens and eights, but we're also not talking about twos. So
And you mentioned earlier as well. It was a great opening, so thank you because you talked about affordability, and I think we struggle on what that actually means because you mentioned I think our average price is somewhere between 350 400 depending on the report. That's pretty good in comparison to other metropolitan areas, but it still doesn't necessarily mean it's affordable. How do you help define affordability for people?
yeah, it's relative affordability, right? Is really what we're talking about in each area. And each area is going to have a different median price point. What I will say is that's under the national norm. So we're above fours for the national median. June ended with the highest recorded price that we've ever had in the 430s for a nationwide whole. So that's relative affordability. But that doesn't mean it's affordable. That doesn't mean that a school teacher or a first responder can go and find a house easily. We know that affordability is really a struggle for people in our local communities to find homes. Even in the 300s to 400s, that could be really hard for a single school teacher to go and afford her or his own home. And so we know that that's really a struggle.
And we know that NAR is a strong advocacy organization. And I don't know if you get the opportunity to go to Capitol Hill, but I think sometimes we talk about affordability and people talk about 50% of AMI. And we're talking about people who have, terminal degrees who are out there full time, that we're talking about affordability for professionals, right? Not just hourly workers.
Oh, totally. Yeah. And I think about a lot the families in my own community. So I'm in the DC area. I work out of the DC office, and I know personally renters who the husband was a first responder, and he and his family had to move more than an hour away so that he could be a first responder in our local communities. And I know that that's likely happening in San Antonio. I know that's happening in communities around the country. And we really need those people in our local communities. We need firefighters, we need paramedics, we need school teachers. And so, as we think about that, that really becomes a struggle for so many people.
Yeah, it's funny because even this morning on the drive in on our local NPR station, they were talking about how the response time for our fire department is slow. And there's a couple of influences, but part of that is just the amount of people who have moved here, right? Infrastructure and all the other things. Interesting. So, um, going back to the idea that you started in 2007, so you saw what was 2008. What is your reaction and what do you tell people when they say, "Oh man, this is 2008 all over again"?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a couple really solid comparisons that we can make that show that it's a very different market. So it's definitely not 2008 all over again. And I am asked this question a lot. The big things that I would rely on to show me that are that if we look back at 2009, we had a peak in distress sales for foreclosures and short sales. That was at 49% of realtors were working with a client who had a distress sale back in 2009. Today, it's 2 to 3% on a monthly basis. Uh, big
Okay.
reasons why. Yeah. So
Yeah.
like that's a huge, huge drop, right? So the big reasons why are that we know that it's really hard to obtain a mortgage today. Your credit score has to be higher. And so, if we look at new mortgage originations, people who just got a mortgage on their home, they are going to have a credit score of 760 or higher. That's the majority of new home buyers. If we look back in 2005 to 2008, which led us into that foreclosure crisis, we know that the majority were way under 700. And so we can see that huge difference, that flip in what's going on in who can qualify for a mortgage. The other big thing that happened is that many Americans have paid off their home. They have earned this housing equity. They've doubled down on payments. They had a low interest rate. And so more than 40% of current homeowners don't even have a mortgage. So we can't be in a state where we were in 2008 because they can't lose their mortgage. They can't have a distressed property. They can't default on a loan that they don't have. So we know that they're sitting pretty. The other thing that we know is there's a lot of all cash buyers right now. So more than a quarter of the market since 2000 or 2022 has actually been paying all cash. And so we're talking about more all cash buyers, more people who own their home outright and can't default on their loan. So those are some really big things that show us that this is a different market, plus the underbuilding, plus home prices still going up for actual population demand.
Do you the if there was I think you mentioned it was like 48% were foreclosure short sales. So that means people were getting loans and perhaps they shouldn't have gotten them. Is there a comparison to, well, back in 2008, I could have graduated college, and I was able to afford a house and I would have been able to buy a house straight out of college. And now the news articles are, the average first time home buyer is 36 years old. I mean, as part of that, 38 years old, is part of that because, in fact, the regulations that were very loose back in 2008 are much stricter and it's making it a lot harder? Or is it because, people just aren't making enough money? We're not saving enough. I know that's like this magic question and it's the answer is everything, but how would you piecemeal that for me to explain it to someone who's like, this is why younger people were able to buy then and not now?
No, that's a really great question. So if anyone watched The Big Short, I think that's a great movie.
Yeah.
So you should go and watch that. But you should also look at just huge stories that were happening back in that time period. We know that credit scores are a big indication of what has happened. There was really loose lending standards. You could go and take out a loan, and really you didn't have to have documentation that you have that income. You could just say, this is what my income is, and no docs to actually prove that. So that's a problem, right? There's a great story actually, and I saw someone who worked at the Federal Reserve. He worked at the Federal Reserve Bank, and he applied for a mortgage for his cat, his four-legged cat, and the cat qualified for a mortgage.
Now, he did this because he was genuinely trying to buy his cat a house, or as a
No,
thought experiment? Okay,
it was a thought experiment, and the
okay,
cat qualified
okay.
for that mortgage. So if the cat is going to qualify for a mortgage on a house, and we know that your typical renter right now who is striving and perhaps working two jobs to scrape that income together, maybe works in the gig economy, is going to struggle to actually obtain a mortgage and may actually have the money for the down payment, may have the money in reserves, but maybe their credit score just isn't high enough to actually qualify, then we know we have a different lending market and we have a different buying market. So as we look at that, we are in two vastly different housing markets than we were back then.
Okay. Now, you mentioned that a lot of buyers right now are cash buyers. And excuse me for just coming back from a Disney trip, but I see Scrooge McDuck, right? Like, what is a cash buyer? I mean, is that an investor? Is that somebody who just has tons of money in the bank? Or is that someone who just is able to sell their current home and pay all cash for the new one?
It's D, all of the above.
I keep going there.
So
Okay.
what we're seeing, yeah, is nearly a third of primary residence buyers. So people are going to live in their home full time, except for when they're at Disney. They're purchasing their home with all cash, and so this is repeat buyers who have housing equity. Perhaps they've been in their home for a long period of time. Definitely see it among baby boomers. So those who are in their 70s, who's a baby boomer, half of those buyers are paying all cash. 40% of younger boomers who are in their 60s are paying all cash. We even see it among Gen Xers, a little bit among older millennials who have been in their homes for longer periods of time, moving to more affordable areas of the country. But you also see vacation home buyers, you see mom and pop investors. So you do see a mix in the housing market of who's able to do that. So it's not just Scrooge McDuck, it's really people who got equity rich on their home and they're moving and they're able to right size their property, maybe right area their property, and they're able to pay all cash.
So especially the people who are more comfortable with remote working, moving from different parts of the country into others, and you take a home in California and you sell that, you can come to Texas and be just fine. Like you might be able to buy a ranch. Yeah, yeah. So that's an all cash buyer too, as it's not just yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
and we're seeing a lot of migration. Texas obviously is the leader in migration. Y'all and Florida are really leading the pack there. And so as we think about everyone who's moved, not just from California, but other areas of the country, yeah, absolutely. Housing affordability, relative housing affordability is a huge driver there, but job growth too. And Texas has really been leading the way in that.
I just want to say I appreciate that you said y'all for the record. Yeah.
Well, technically I live in Virginia, so I say y'all.
There, I got you. I got you. Okay, so um, down payment. There's the all cash buyer, and then there's the first time home buyer. And I read an article that you wrote about down payment and how most people feel that they have to drop 20% on a home in order to do that. And part of that, I think you wrote was, hey, they're talking to their family as opposed to a realtor who can tell them there's tons of options out there for you. But then you also wrote, well, the repeat buyer actually is spending 20%. How do we communicate out to consumers and how do our members go and say like, hey, let's just clear this up. You know, you don't need 20% on your first time home buy.
Yeah, so I'm going to do a shameless plug right now for our
Please.
social media
Okay.
so that you can grab an infographic. And actually, it's a really fun one. It's a Chutes and Ladders infographic that shows you how you can get into homeownership with low down payment loans. So, thinking about an FHA loan where you need in the 3% range, thinking about a VA loan where you don't need a down payment. There are loan options out there for home buyers. And I think this is a huge misinformation gap where they're going to mom and dad, they're asking, how did you buy your house in the 1980s? Well, I bought my house this way and you need 20% down, as opposed to asking a mortgage broker, as opposed to asking a real estate agent who's a realtor, how did you get into home ownership? And how do I get there? And that's really, I think there's a lot of overlooked programs too that people are just not thinking of. So absolutely grab the infographic, but communicating that information, I think is really helpful. Potential first time home buyers could get there easier.
We hope that if there are consumers listening, that they're willing to go and talk to one of our members to get that advice and to find out if they're ready. Now, if they went to that infographic, what are the other things that they're going to see that's going to encourage them or help them to become that first time home buyer?
Well, I think the other big encouragement is that for actual first time homebuyers in the last year, the median down payment was just 9%. It was not 20%. So just thinking about even the people who came before you, that we know that there are very successful home buyers who are taking advantage of low down payment programs and getting into homeownership faster than perhaps you are scraping and sniffing and saying this is so far off. Well, maybe you could actually get there sooner.
Got it. So as we kind of start wrapping up here and talk about a little bit on what we can expect for, this is our mid-year forecast. We're just making that up right now. Like we've talked about it, we're steady. How do we expect 2026 to look?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple really encouraging things that are happening right now. Interest rates are steady. We do expect and we hope that interest rates will tick down a little bit. That should bring more people into the buying market. If we look at your local area in San Antonio and we think about the renter base there and housing affordability and how difficult that is, well, mortgage interest rates are one component of that. If we think about interest rates going down to 6%, it could actually bring in 4,366 new buyers into your local market. That's a very precise figure,
That's
but that's
great.
what we've
Yeah.
estimated. Yeah, if you're a realtor out there, you can check out our Metro Market Statistics dashboard and you can play around with these numbers. and see what would happen if interest rates went to 6%. What would that market look like for you as a scenario? The other thing that I would say too is new inventory is coming in. We know that really home buyers have been shut out because they haven't had enough inventory to even look at, to plot where they want to put their Christmas tree or the table that they want to have Thanksgiving dinner at. And so thinking about new inventory coming into the market gives them a chance to negotiate with that seller, gives them a chance to actually see that home is a more equal playing field as opposed to an extreme seller's market that it had been. And that's a more approachable market to home buyers who've been on the sidelines for a lot of years.
So, I mean, all in all, things are going to be, a-okay, right?
Well, we're definitely, yeah, we're looking at more home sales activity next year. We're looking at slightly lower interest rates. That's good too for affordability. So that's a more optimistic year, certainly in 2026. Yeah.
One of the things that I remember always kind of paying attention to when I would go to Housing Forecast was they always mentioned there was a market correction every 10 years. There's been a market correction every 10 years. But it's kind of been a lot. We're going on like year 17. How do economists address that? Is that idea no longer as prevalent? This automatic correction every 10 years.
Well, I don't know that we can say that anymore, especially when you throw the pandemic years in there, especially when you throw in 2 and 3% interest rates. Was that a correction? Certainly not, but that was certainly an upending, a
For sure.
mixing
Yeah.
of the housing market, right? And so you throw in these really unique events, and I don't think that you can just say like clockwork, it's always going to happen like this anymore. There's a right sizing of the housing market going on right now. It's really level setting back to where we were in 2019, like you said. And so I think that's really what we're looking at versus the extreme housing market that we were in before.
So, last couple of questions. I want to just focus on our members, the ones that are listening today. The ones that are just getting into the market or the ones that have been, committed to, making home ownership a reality for the community for years. What are we telling them about what to expect and how they can look forward to being successful in their business and being entrepreneurs? What is the stats for our members?
Yeah, that's a great question because this is a different market. So if you're brand new to the market and you've only started since 2020, this is going to look very, very different. And so it probably is going to make you worried. But as you're worried, just build up the skills, build up the education, look at the resources, and know that 2026 is looking to be a better housing market for home buyers as they look at more inventory and relatively slightly better affordability. That's certainly a good thing. For seasoned members, you've been through this, and so you've seen different housing markets. You know that that 2020 to 2022 was not normal, and actually could have been very stressful on you too. I heard a lot about agent fatigue at that time period. So perhaps you're working with people who are seeing this more equal playing field. But I don't think it's easy for sellers out there. So if you're working with sellers and they're saying, "But I want what my neighbor had back in 2021," well, they're not going to see that, and so telling them the facts, level setting with them, telling them the good comps in their neighborhood and really showing them, I think is how you break through a lot of the noise right now. And I think what's really important to note too is the noise is loud. There is a lot of noise and misinformation that goes around social media. It goes around families. It goes around alarm bells and bad headlines that don't tell the full story. And so breaking through and grabbing as much information and data that you can, I think is really helpful.
Which is one of the things that NAR is absolutely committed to doing at a new level now. I mean, there's so much more stuff coming out from NAR as far as research on that to make sure that y'all are the voice at a national level.
Yeah, we are trying. So if you're not following us on social media, the NAR research social media feeds, we're literally everywhere. We're on LinkedIn, we're on Instagram, Facebook, X, Blue Sky now. So we're everywhere that you are. So grab the information.
Awesome. I keep referring to you as Jessica only because you're extremely approachable and it's always easy to talk to you. But Dr. Lautz,
It's all good.
I just wanted to make sure everyone understood your level of expertise in this. I greatly appreciate you taking the time to visit with us and for helping us educate our listeners a little bit about what's going on. So we look forward to talking to you in maybe 6 months or something else.
Sounds great. Thank you so much for having me. This was a great conversation.